The beige walls of Dr. Anya Sharma's office were the color of resignation. It was a calculated neutrality, designed, I supposed, to be a blank canvas onto which couples could project their turmoil without it clashing with the decor. For me, after 5 previous sessions, the blandness had taken on an active quality. It was a quiet, suffocating presence. I sat in the stiff, modernist armchair, feeling the coarse weave of its fabric through my trousers, a constant, low-grade irritant. 6 weeks ago, on our first visit, I'd seen the chair as a symbol of hope, a tangible step towards resolution. Now it just felt like a witness box. Across the chasm of beige carpet, Chloe reclined on the small couch. It was a deliberate choice, one she'd made in session 3 to create more personal space. Her body was angled away, her profile framed by the large window where a fierce June storm had begun to beat against the glass. The city skyline was a smudge of gray, the weather a perfect, pathetic fallacy for the state of our union. She was watching the rain, seemingly captivated, as if the drama outside was far more compelling than the one inside. "Liam," Dr. Sharma began, her voice a gentle but insistent instrument, honed to cut through precisely this kind of tense silence. "You were going to talk about the weekend." I dragged my gaze from a water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a map of a country I never wanted to visit. "Right, the weekend." My voice came out flat, stripped of the anger and hurt that had been its fuel for the past 3 days. I recited the facts with the detached precision of an architect reading a surveyor's report. It was our 3rd anniversary. I'd made reservations at Isabel's, the place we had our first proper date. Her sister was all set to watch the kids. The plan was an evening, just for us. I paused, the silence in the room amplifying the sound of the scratching of Dr. Sharma's pen on her legal pad. Then Julian called. I didn't need to elaborate further. Julian had become the 3rd unseen participant in these sessions. "He was having a crisis," I continued. "A gallery owner who'd promised him a solo show had pulled out. He was, and I quote, utterly devastated and questioning his entire existence." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "So, she canceled our dinner. She spent the night at his studio, drinking wine and talking him off the ledge." Dr. Sharma absorbed this, her expression unreadable. Then she turned her kind, perceptive eyes to Chloe. "And Chloe, how was that experience for you?" Here it came. The performance. Chloe turned from the window, her face a carefully arranged mask of compassionate solemnity. She didn't look at me. She never did when she had to defend him. She addressed a neutral point on the beige wall, somewhere between me and the therapist. "It was incredibly difficult," she said, her voice a soft, breathy masterpiece of dramatic sincerity. "To see a friend, a person with such a fragile, sensitive soul in that much pain. It was heartbreaking. His art is everything to him, Liam knows that. This rejection, it felt like a death to him. He needed someone to hold space for him, to be present with him in his grief and validate his feelings without judgment." She used our words, the vocabulary we were paying $180 an hour to learn. Hold space, validate, be present. She took these tools that were meant to be our salvation, our bridge back to each other, and expertly wielded them as a shield for him. I listened, mesmerized by the audacity of it as she spun a grand narrative of her own noble sacrifice. She was the empathetic saint, rushing to the side of the tragic artist. I watched her, truly watched her, and it was like looking at a photograph that had been expertly doctored. Everything looked right, the shape, the form, the colors, but a fundamental truth had been altered. The woman I loved was a phantom, and this articulate, passionate defender of another man was the stranger who had taken her place. It was in that moment, under the low hum of the recessed lighting, with the rain drumming a frantic rhythm against the glass, that the last frayed filament of hope inside me finally burned out. It wasn't a dramatic snap, but a quiet, final fizzle. This wasn't about us anymore. It was about her and him. I finally understood that I couldn't force her to see me. I couldn't make her choose us. But I could choose myself. My objective for the session changed in an instant, with a clarity that was both terrifying and profoundly liberating. I wasn't here to save our relationship. I was here to say goodbye. It hadn't always been like this. The air between us hadn't always been this thin and sterile. 5 years ago, it had been thick with the scent of damp earth and patchouli from a dozen competing incense stalls at the folk festival where we met. I was hiding from the oppressive August sun under a sprawling oak tree, trying to look intellectually superior by critiquing the headliner's chord progressions to my friend Mark. And then I heard her laugh. It wasn't a giggle, it was a full-throated, joyful eruption that cut through the humid air. She was in a yellow sundress, her hair tied up in a messy bun, arguing passionately with her friend. I've forgotten what clumsy line I used to enter their conversation, but I'll never forget what happened next. We locked eyes, and the festival, the music, the crowd, all of it just dissolved into a soft, blurry background. We spent the next 6 hours talking. We discovered a shared adoration for the stark, concrete honesty of brutalist architecture and a mutual belief that truffle oil was a culinary crime. It was effortless. It was the dizzying, terrifying, wonderful feeling of finding a piece of your own mind residing in someone else's. That night, I went home and told Mark I had met the woman I was going to marry. Our life together was a construction project built on a foundation of moments. We found a ramshackle one-bedroom apartment with glorious high ceilings and what the landlord optimistically called patina. We spent that first summer together stripping layers of ancient wallpaper and sanding the original hardwood floors by hand. I remember one sweltering afternoon, both of us covered in a fine layer of sawdust and sweat, collapsing onto a drop cloth in a fit of laughter, too tired to move. Chloe dabbed a streak of white paint on my nose, called me her dusty ghost, and kissed me. In that moment, surrounded by chaos and demolition, I had never felt more at home. Our nights were for dreaming. We'd sit on our fire escape, sharing a bottle of cheap red wine, and design our future. We planned trips to see the work of Louis Kahn. We debated the ethics of raising children in the city. We confessed our deepest insecurities and our most outlandish ambitions. She was the one who encouraged me to leave the corporate firm I hated and start my own small practice. "Your designs have too much soul for those glass and steel boxes," she'd told me, her belief in me more solid than any concrete I'd ever poured. The pinnacle of that shared life was Lisbon. A spontaneous trip for my 30th birthday. We got wonderfully, hopelessly lost in the winding, cobblestoned streets of the Alfama district. I, the meticulous planner, was starting to panic, but Chloe just grabbed my hand, bought 2 warm, sugary pastéis de nata from a tiny hole-in-the-wall bakery, and led me to a stone wall overlooking the glittering Tagus River. We sat there for an hour, our shoulders touching, not saying a word, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a moment of perfect, unspoken harmony. That was Theos I was fighting for. That was the memory I'd replay in my mind when things started to get difficult. The blueprint of a love I believed was structurally sound. Julian was a ghost from Chloe's university days who materialized about a year into our relationship, drifting back into her orbit with a cloud of artistic pretension and second-hand smoke. He was a musician, perpetually on the verge of a breakthrough that never quite came. Initially, I saw him as harmless. He'd join us for dinner sometimes, his clothes artfully distressed, and tell long, rambling stories about life on the road. He was a character, a part of Chloe's history, and I, wanting to be the secure, enlightened boyfriend, welcomed him. The warning signs were subtle at first, like hairline cracks in a plaster wall. There were the inside jokes, delivered with a quick conspiratorial glance between them that made me feel like I was listening from another room. Then there were the text messages. Her phone would light up late at night, and she'd smile down at the screen, her thumbs flying in a rapid, hushed conversation. "Just Julian," she'd murmur if she caught me looking. "He's having another drama with his drummer." I'd nod, swallow the small, bitter pill of exclusion, and tell myself it was nothing. This was who she was, a deeply loyal friend. Her compassion was one of the things I loved most about her. To be jealous of it felt churlish, a betrayal of the trust she had in me. So I ignored the unsettling feeling that her compassion for him was a different vintage than her compassion for anyone else. The first real tremor, the one that shook the entire structure of my trust, happened on a Tuesday night in November. I came home from work, late, exhausted but elated. My fledgling firm had just landed its first significant commission, a small library. I walked in the door, ready to sweep her up and take her out for a celebratory dinner, but I found her pacing the living room, chewing on her thumbnail. "What's wrong?" I asked, my own excitement deflating at the sight of her distress. "It's Julian," she said, not meeting my eyes. "His van died, in the middle of nowhere. He's going to miss a huge gig in Chicago, and he's going to lose the deposit on the venue." She finally looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "I co-signed a loan for him, for a new van and some equipment he needed. It went through this afternoon." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It wasn't a small amount of money. It was a significant chunk of the savings we had been painstakingly accumulating for a down payment on a house, our future. "You did what?" My voice was dangerously quiet. "Without talking to me?" "I had to, Liam. There wasn't time." Her voice rose, her defensiveness flaring instantly. "He was desperate. This is his career. You know his credit is shot." "And what about our career, Chloe? Our life?" I shot back, the anger finally breaking through my shock. "That was our money, our shared savings. We had a plan." "It's my money too," she retorted, and her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. "I'm allowed to help my friends. I'm sorry if you can't understand that, but my friendships are important to me. I will not apologize for being a loyal person." The argument that followed was ugly and corrosive. It was the first time she had drawn such a clear line in the sand between her life and our life. The fight wasn't just about the money. It was about the profound betrayal of our partnership. She had made a massive, unilateral decision about our shared future, and in her justification she positioned me as the obstacle to her own virtue. We made up, of course. A few days later, there were tears and apologies. I apologized for my anger. She apologized for the secrecy. But something had broken. The hairline crack had widened into a visible fissure, and for the first time, I looked at the beautiful life we were building and was terrified that it was all resting on an unstable foundation. The decision to start therapy, made in the tense aftermath of the fight over the loan, felt like a ceasefire. It was my proposition, a desperate attempt to bring in a neutral mediator to help us rebuild the trust that had been so badly damaged. Chloe eventually agreed, her reluctance framed as a skepticism about shrinking our problems away. But she promised to try. For the first 2 sessions, she was the model patient, and I allowed a fragile, tentative hope to take root in the scorched earth of my anxiety. Those initial hours with Dr. Sharma were deceptively calm, like the eye of a storm. We learned the lexicon of emotional repair. We practiced using I statements. I would say, "I feel hurt when my plans are canceled at the last minute." And she would nod with practiced solemnity and respond, "I hear that you feel hurt, and I understand that my actions impacted you." It was a script and a sterile and impersonal exchange, but it felt like progress. We talked about our communication styles, my tendency to withdraw, her tendency to deflect with humor. Julian's name was a ghost in the room, mentioned only in passing as an external stressor. Dr. Sharma suggested we focus first on the dynamic between the two of us. For 2 weeks, I clung to that suggestion like a life raft. I believed we were finally addressing the structural issues, not just wallpapering over the cracks. The shift came in our 3rd session. The designated topic was establishing and respecting boundaries. This was it. This was my chance to address the core issue without it devolving into another fight about money or a specific canceled date. I took a deep breath and spoke, carefully constructing my sentences. I talked about needing to feel like the priority in our partnership, about the emotional toll of feeling like I was in constant competition with the never-ending stream of Julian's dramas. I explained that I needed our home to be a sanctuary from that chaos, not a remote command center for it. Chloe listened with the patient, attentive air of a scholar. When I finished, she didn't look at me. She addressed Dr. Sharma. "I hear what Liam is saying, and I truly honor his feelings," she began, her voice smooth and reasonable. It was the tone she used when she was about to completely invalidate everything I'd just said. "But I think we're running up against a conflict in our core values. Liam is, by nature, a planner, an architect. He craves structure and predictability. I, on the other hand, value spontaneity and a deep, almost spiritual sense of loyalty to my chosen family." She paused, letting the words settle. "What Liam is describing as a boundary, I experience as a restriction on my emotional autonomy. My friendship with Julian nourishes a part of my soul that is wilder, more artistic. It's a vital part of who I am. To ask me to build a wall around that isn't asking for a boundary. It's asking me to amputate a part of myself." I stared at her, dumbfounded. She had taken my plea for intimacy and connection and expertly reframed it as an attack on her very identity. I was no longer a partner asking for his place. I was the boring, rigid architect trying to cage a beautiful, wild spirit. Dr. Sharma made a gentle attempt to intervene. "Perhaps the goal isn't a wall, Chloe, but a gate? One that you and Liam can agree on when to open and close." But Chloe just shook her head sadly, as if disappointed that even our therapist couldn't grasp the profound spiritual depth of her dilemma. Session 4 was an exercise in psychological warfare. I came in feeling bruised but determined. I had concrete evidence. The week before, she had told me she was going to a late-night yoga class. Exhausted, I'd fallen asleep early. The next morning, I saw a charge on our credit card statement from the Nightingale, a moody wine bar across town that I knew was Julian's favorite haunt. The charge was time-stamped at 11:30 p.m. My hands trembled slightly as I brought it up. I laid out the facts calmly, just the facts. The stated plan versus the reality of the credit card charge. Chloe didn't flinch. She listened, her expression softening into one of deep pity, a look that instantly put me on the defensive. "You're right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't go to yoga. I went to meet Julian. He'd just finished a demo track, and he was convinced it was terrible. He was spiraling, and he called me. I met him for one drink." She finally looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Liam, the only reason I didn't tell you is because I knew this is how you would react. I knew it would trigger your insecurity." She then turned to Dr. Sharma, her voice taking on the tone of a weary collaborator in my healing. "We've talked about Liam's trust issues, Dr. Sharma. We know they stem from the infidelity in his parents' marriage. It's a deep wound for him. And seeing me with Julian, even platonically, I know it touches that wound. So, I made a judgment call. I chose to handle my friend's crisis without bringing it into our home, without causing Liam the pain I knew it would cause him. It was a clumsy attempt to protect him from his own triggers. I see now it was the wrong way to do it, but I swear it came from a place of love." I felt the air rush out of my lungs. It was a breathtaking performance. She had taken a simple, straightforward lie and transformed it into a complex, noble act of therapeutic protection. My discovery of her deceit was no longer about her dishonesty. It was about my psychological damage. My reaction was the problem, not her action. I was the patient, and she was my ill-equipped but well-meaning caregiver. I looked at Dr. Sharma, hoping for a lifeline, but the therapist could only navigate the narrative presented to her. "Liam," she asked gently, "how does it feel to hear that Chloe's intention was to protect you?" I couldn't answer. I felt sick. By the 5th session, I had largely given up. I sat in my chair feeling like a spectator, and the entire hour was a spectacle. Julian, it seemed, had been accused by an ex-bandmate of plagiarizing a melody. He was, according to Chloe, falling apart. The session became her platform to mount a passionate, righteous defense of his artistic integrity. She spoke of his influences, of the universality of certain chord progressions, of the malicious jealousy of less talented rivals. She had apparently spent the entire week on the phone with him, coaching him, connecting him with a copyright lawyer she knew, and talking him out of a deep depression. I tried once to interrupt the monologue. "Dr. Sharma," I said, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears, "could we possibly talk about us? We haven't had a real conversation in 2 weeks." Chloe turned to me, her eyes flashing with a fire I hadn't seen directed at me in years. But it wasn't a fire of passion. It was one of pure indignation. "I cannot believe you right now," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "My friend, my best friend, is having his character and his career assassinated. And you want to talk about our feelings? This is about loyalty, Liam. This is about standing up for the people you love when they are being unjustly attacked. Don't you see? The part of me that is fighting for him, that is dropping everything to defend him, that is the exact same part that loves you. It's who I am. To question this is to question the very foundation of my ability to love. Do you not want me to be a loyal person?" It was the checkmate. A brilliant, maddening, manipulative checkmate. She had wrapped her emotional affair in the noble flag of loyalty, making any criticism of her actions a criticism of her most virtuous quality. I was silenced. I leaned my head back against the chair and stared at the beige ceiling. The therapeutic battlefield was lost. She had outmaneuvered me at every turn, using the very weapons I had hoped would save us. I felt utterly and completely alone, a stranger in my own life, sitting next to a woman who was fighting with every fiber of her being for another man. I left the 5th therapy session in a state of profound numbness. The anger and frustration that had been my constant companions for months had finally burned themselves out, leaving behind a cold, empty landscape. Chloe's checkmate, her masterful transformation of a blatant emotional affair into a heroic act of loyalty, had been so total, so audacious, that it broke something in me. The fight was over. She had won. I drove home in silence, the city lights smearing across the rain-slicked windscreen. In the apartment, we moved around each other like ghosts, the silence between us a heavy, suffocating blanket. The relationship was already dead. We were just waiting for someone to sign the certificate. For the next week, I existed in a state of detachment. I went to work, I sketched designs, I spoke to clients, I ate meals. But none of it felt real. It was as if I were watching a film of my own life. Chloe, for her part, seemed lighter, almost buoyant, as if having vanquished my pathetic concerns in therapy had unburdened her. She hummed as she made coffee. She spoke on the phone with Julian constantly, her voice a low, happy murmur from the other room, no longer bothering to hide it. Why should she? The matter had been settled. Her loyalty was a virtue, and I was simply not enlightened enough to appreciate it. I felt a strange, distant pity for the man I had been a week earlier, the man who still thought there was something left to fight for. The truth arrived on a Tuesday night, exactly 1 week before our next scheduled session. Chloe was out, attending a last-minute networking event for a new artists' collective. I was working late at the dining table, our shared laptop open in front of me. I was trying to find a specific municipal building code for a new project, a frustratingly obscure piece of zoning law. Annoyed, I decided to use the laptop's universal search function instead of digging through the labyrinthine government websites. I typed code into the search bar and hit enter. A list of files populated the screen. Most were what I expected: PDFs of regulations, old project files. But one file name caught my eye. It was a simple text document created over a year ago, sitting in a deeply buried folder of Chloe's old university essays. It was titled simply Codes. A flicker of something, not yet suspicion, but a dull, morbid curiosity, made me click on it. The document contained a short list, a few keyboard shortcuts for a design program I didn't recognize, and below them, a line of text that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Cloud PW, J_sun and moon _4 ever. My heart started a slow, heavy pounding against my ribs. Jay, it was insane. It was paranoid. But it was there. I opened our shared cloud storage drive, a digital attic filled with years of photos, documents, and shared memories. I clicked through Chloe's folder, then into a subfolder labeled Travel, and then another, named Portugal. We had gone to Portugal together 5 years ago. The folder should have been full of our photos. Us covered in sand on a beach in the Algarve, me looking grumpy in front of a tourist trap, her laughing on a trolley car in Lisbon. But this folder was different. It contained only one item. Another folder, this one showing a small padlock icon next to its name. It was password protected. My blood ran cold. I stared at the password prompt blinking on the screen. J_sun and moon _4 ever. My fingers felt thick and clumsy as I typed it in. I pressed enter. Access granted. The folder wasn't full of photos. It was full of documents, dozens of them. Word documents, each titled with a date. I clicked on the earliest one, dated 18 months prior. My hands were shaking. My dearest Jay, he's asleep. I can hear him breathing in the next room. It's the only time I feel like I can breathe too. The only time I can really be with you, even if it's just here, on this page. He bought me flowers today, peonies. He remembered they were my favorite. And all I could think was that it felt like he was laying them on a grave. The grave of the woman I used to be. The woman you are bringing back to life. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the table. I clicked on another letter from a few months later. He tries so hard, my sweet, boring architect. He designs these beautiful, perfect, stable structures, and he wants our life to be just like them. But he doesn't understand that I don't want to live in a house. I want to live in a storm. You are my storm, Julian. You are lightning and thunder and glorious, destructive rain, and I have never felt so alive. I scrolled frantically, a digital archaeologist unearthing the ruins of his own life. The letters became more intense, more desperate. She wrote about our therapy sessions, mocking my attempts to fix things. We had another session today. Liam talked about his feelings. Again, it's like listening to a dial tone. He thinks a few I statements can patch up the Grand Canyon that has opened up between us. He has no idea that every time I nod and say, "I hear you," I am really thinking of your hands, your voice, the way you say my name. Dr. Sharma thinks we need better communication. What we need is a time machine so I can go back and meet you first. The final letter was dated just 3 weeks ago, right after our 4th session, the one where she'd so brilliantly weaponized my family history against me. It was no longer just an emotional confession. It was a plan. My love, my sun, and my moon, you were right. The plagiarism thing was a blessing. It showed me how fiercely I am willing to fight for you, for us. I can't live this lie anymore. It's corroding my soul. Your album will be done by the end of summer. Once it's out, once you have that momentum, I'm done. I will tell him. We'll have our painful, dramatic scenes, and then I will be free. We will be free. Forget a new van, my love. We'll buy a ticket to Berlin, 2 one-way tickets. Just a few more months of pretending. Then we can finally be us. Forever. I pushed back from the table, a strangled sound escaping my throat. I stumbled to the bathroom and retched into the toilet, my body convulsing, though nothing came up. The world had tilted on its axis. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more calculated than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't a mistake, a flirtation, a moment of weakness. It was a long, meticulously documented conspiracy. Our entire relationship for the past 1.5 years had been a performance, and I was the only one who didn't have the script. When the nausea subsided, something else took its place. The grief was still there, a vast, black ocean inside me. But floating on top of it was a strange, buoyant calm, an absolute, cold, diamond-hard clarity. The architect in me surveyed the scene. The foundation wasn't cracked. It had been built on quicksand from the start. The structure was rotten to its core. There was nothing to salvage, nothing to renovate. The only logical, rational, and safe course of action was total demolition. When Chloe came home an hour later, flushed and happy from her networking, I was sitting on the couch reading a book. I looked up and gave her a small, polite smile. "Hey," I said. "How was it?" "Oh, you know," she said, shrugging off her coat. "A lot of pretentious people, but I made a few good contacts." She chattered on as she made tea, and I listened, nodding in all the right places. The man who would have once analyzed her every word, her every micro-expression for a hint of distance was gone. I was no longer a participant. I was an anthropologist, observing the bizarre rituals of a foreign tribe. For the next week I played my part perfectly. I was calm, I was quiet, I was agreeable. My serenity seemed to unnerve her more than my anger ever had. I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes when I didn't rise to any bait, when I didn't question her late nights. I was just waiting for our 4 p.m. appointment the following Tuesday. When the day came, we drove to Dr. Sharma's office in separate cars. I sat in my designated armchair, the coarse fabric of familiar discomfort. The storm from the week of my discovery had passed, and the sun cast long shadows across the beige carpet. The session began, and I let it play out exactly as it had in my memory of the last 2 months. Chloe recounted the story of the canceled anniversary. I listened to her spin her tale of Julian's artistic crisis, her voice full of feigned compassion. I heard her use our words, holding space, validating feelings, and they sounded like a foreign language. She was a brilliant actress, playing to an audience of one, completely unaware that he had already read the final, secret script. Dr. Sharma turned to me. "Liam, your response to what Chloe has shared." A long, profound silence stretched across the room. I let it hang there, heavy and meaningful. I looked at Chloe, at her face arranged in that familiar mask of noble suffering. There was no anger left in me. There was only a vast, desolate pity. I took a slow, deep breath. When I spoke, my voice was steady, calm, and final. "She's right," I said. My words hung in the sterile air, simple, declarative, and completely outside the established script of our sessions. Chloe stared at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. This was not the expected response. She had been braced for a wounded rebuttal, another round of me explaining my feelings. My agreement was a strategic move she couldn't compute. I saw her glance at Dr. Sharma, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, before turning back to me. What do you mean I'm right?" she asked, her voice cautious. I let the silence stretch for a beat longer, holding her gaze. My heart was a steady, heavy drum against my ribs, not frantic, but funereal. "I mean you're right," I repeated, my voice even and devoid of inflection. "Julian does need you. He needs your support. He needs your passion. He needs you to fight for him." I paused, letting each sentence land like a shovelful of dirt on a coffin. "And that's why this is our last session." The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pallid, waxy sheen. "What are you talking about, Liam? Don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic," I said. "I'm being factual. It's a courtesy I feel I owe you, since you haven't extended the same one to me." I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees, a posture of calm intimacy that was more menacing than any anger I could have shown. "A week ago, I found your letters, Chloe. The ones to Julian, in the Portugal folder." A sharp, ragged gasp escaped her lips. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world shattering into a million pieces. "How?" "Password was J_sun_and moon_4ever," I continued, my voice a quiet, relentless force. "Clever? A little on the nose, but clever?" I watched the sequence of emotions play across her face, stark, white-hot terror, followed by the rapid gathering of her defenses. The mask of the martyr was gone, and the cornered animal was emerging. "You went through my private things?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. It was her first move, the classic misdirection. Attack the method of discovery, ignore the discovery itself. "I was looking for a municipal code for the library project," I said matter-of-factly. "But I suppose I found a code of a different sort, one that explains the last 18 months of our life together." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I saw in her eyes that she knew she was utterly, irrevocably exposed. I quoted a line I had memorized, a line that had twisted like a knife in my gut for 7 straight days. "He designs beautiful, stable structures, but he doesn't understand that I don't want to live in a house. I want to live in a storm. I understand now, Chloe. Go live in your storm." Her composure finally broke. The raw, desperate rage I had been expecting finally erupted. "You have no right!" she shrieked, bolting upright on the couch. Her fists were clenched, her knuckles white. "No right to read my thoughts, my private feelings. You twist everything. It wasn't a plan, it was a fantasy, a way to cope. You have no idea what it's been like, living with your silences, your moods, your constant need for reassurance." She turned desperately to Dr. Sharma, her eyes wild and pleading. "Tell him! Dr. Sharma, tell him this isn't right. He's taking my private journals and using them as a weapon. This is a violation!" Dr. Sharma remained impassive, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her voice, when she spoke, was still gentle, but it held a new firmness. "Chloe, we can discuss the violation of your privacy, but the content of what Liam has found is also on the table now. The letters appear to confirm the very concerns Liam has been trying to voice for months." Chloe looked as if she'd been slapped. Betrayed by her last potential ally, she spun back to me, her accusations becoming more frantic, more unhinged. "So this is it? You find something you don't like, something you twist into your own paranoid narrative, and you just blow up 5 years of our life? 5 years. I supported you when you started your business. I was there. Where is your loyalty?" The word hung in the air between us, so ludicrous, so utterly devoid of its meaning that I almost laughed. "Loyalty?" I asked, the question soft but deadly. "You want to talk about loyalty, you who sat in this very room last week and lectured me on the sacred nature of loyalty while you had a fully drafted plan to leave me for another man? You who used the language of therapy to gaslight me into believing my own sanity was the problem, don't you dare speak to me about loyalty." I stood up slowly. The architect in me had finished his assessment. The demolition was authorized. The woman who talked about loyalty, the woman I loved, is gone. Or maybe she was never really there. I don't know. And honestly, I don't care anymore. I looked past her to Dr. Sharma. "Thank you for your time. I think we're done here." My voice was clear and final. I concluded with the line I had been holding in reserve, the one that summarized the entire travesty. "She used our couples therapy to defend him. I'm using this session to say goodbye forever." The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe stared at me, her mouth agape, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by the stark, terrifying realization of the consequences. The game was over. Dr. Sharma, ever the professional, navigated the final, awkward moments. "Given the circumstances," she said calmly, "I agree that continuing would not be productive right now. We should probably discuss the immediate logistics." "There's nothing to discuss," I said, picking up my jacket from the back of the chair. "I'll stay at Mark's place tonight. I'll come by the apartment tomorrow to get some things, when you're not there." "Liam, wait," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking. It was the first time she had sounded truly broken, not performatively so. But it was too late. The emotional connection had been severed. Hearing her pleas was like listening to a message on an old answering machine from someone who was no longer in your life. I walked out of the office without looking back. I didn't wait for the elevator, taking the stairs two at a time, needing the physical motion. The cool air of the street hit me like a splash of cold water. The city seemed brighter, the sounds sharper. In the car, I sat for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. My phone began to buzz in my pocket. A call from Chloe. I watched her name flash on the screen. Then I declined the call and turned the phone off. It buzzed again in my hand as it was powering down, a final, desperate electronic plea. I tossed it onto the passenger seat. The silence that filled the car was a blessing. I drove through the familiar streets of the city, but they looked new. I felt a strange sense of lightness, of a terrible, crushing weight having been lifted from my shoulders. It was the brutal, terrifying, exhilarating freedom of a man who has lost everything and has nothing left to fear. I pulled up in front of Mark's apartment building, the place that would be my temporary sanctuary. As I walked towards the front door, I could feel the ghost of the man who had walked into that therapy office an hour ago, peeling away from me. He was pleading, he was hopeful, he was a victim. I left him behind on the pavement. I pressed the buzzer, and as the lock clicked open, I stepped across the threshold, closing the door firmly on the life that was already behind me. The first week was a blur of displaced reality. I slept in Mark's spare room, a space that smelled faintly of old books and his abandoned attempts at oil painting. He was a good friend, a great one. He didn't press for details beyond what I'd told him in my initial clipped phone call. He simply made sure there was coffee in the pot every morning and a beer in the fridge every evening. He provided a quiet, stable presence that was the antithesis of the chaos I had just escaped. During the day, I would go to my office, a small studio space that suddenly felt like my only true territory, and I would work with a ferocious, single-minded focus. The clean, logical lines of my blueprints were a balm to my fractured mind. In the logic of load-bearing walls and structural integrity, there were no lies, no hidden meanings. A thing was either sound or it was not. The logistics of separating a 5-year life were brutal in their mundanity. Our communication devolved into a series of terse, functional text messages, stripped of all emotion. Me. The hydro bill came. I've paid my half. Chloe. K. TTAX. Chloe. When are you getting your things? I need to know. Me. Saturday morning. Please make sure you aren't there. Finding a new apartment was a disorienting experience. I walked through a dozen sterile, empty spaces, trying to picture a future in them. I eventually settled on a small one-bedroom in a different neighborhood, a place with no shared memories, a blank slate. It had a large picture window in the living room that looked out over a canopy of old trees. The day I signed the lease, I felt the first genuine flicker of something resembling hope. The hardest part was going back to our old apartment to pack. As promised, Chloe was gone. The silence in the space was deafening, thick with the ghosts of laughter and arguments. I walked through the rooms that I had helped renovate, paint, and furnish, and felt like an archaeologist examining a pristine but lifeless tomb. Every object was a landmine of memory. The worn spot on the arm of the couch where she always sat. The chipped coffee mug I'd bought her on our trip to Lisbon. I worked mechanically, taping up boxes with a ruthless efficiency, trying to disconnect from the history embedded in everything I touched. While clearing out my side of the closet, I found a single, stray sock of hers, a brightly colored thing with cartoon avocados on it. I sank down onto the floor, the small, silly piece of fabric clutched in my hand, and the grief I had been holding at bay finally washed over me in a great heaving wave. I wept. I wept for the woman I had loved, for the future I had lost, and for the fool I had been. Then, after the storm passed, I stood up, wiped my face, put the sock on her side of the bed, and finished packing. I let her keep the couch, the expensive coffee machine, the art. I just wanted my books, my clothes, and my freedom. A month after the breakup, I scheduled one final solo session with Dr. Sharma. I needed to close the loop. I sat in the same armchair, but the room no longer felt hostile. It was just a room. I wanted to thank you, I told her, my voice clear. I know things ended in a way no one could have anticipated, but this process, it worked. It didn't save the relationship, but it saved me. It gave me the space and the clarity to see the truth. So, thank you. She offered me a small, compassionate smile. Therapy is a tool, Liam. It illuminates what is already there. You were the one who had the courage to look at it and to act. That takes incredible strength. We spoke for the rest of the hour about my plans, my new apartment, the future. I left her office for the last time feeling not broken, but whole. Life began to find a new rhythm. I reconnected with friends like Mark, who I realized I had unintentionally sidelined during the all-consuming drama of my relationship. I started jogging in the mornings, enjoying the simple feeling of my own lungs and legs working. There were moments of profound, unexpected peace. Sitting in my new, sun-drenched living room on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and a book, the only sound the rustling of leaves outside my window. 2 months after the end, Mark and I were at a pub for trivia night. A mutual acquaintance came over to our table. After some awkward small talk, she said with the feigned nonchalance of someone delivering gossip, "Did you hear about Chloe? She and Julian moved in together. They got a place over in the distillery district. I guess it's serious." I braced for the familiar sting of anger or jealousy. But there was nothing. Only a deep, quiet, weary sense of validation. It was the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place, confirming the narrative I had discovered in those letters. The shadow that had haunted me for so long was no longer a shadow. It was just a fact, a piece of information that belonged to someone else's life. I smiled faintly, thanked her for the news, and turned my attention back to the trivia question on the screen. It was about architecture. I knew the answer.